Hi, I'm Wendy. At dinner, my sister raised her glass and called me a beggar. Said I shouldn't be eating steak with people like them. What she didn't know was the title deed had my name on it the whole time. They didn't just cut me out of the will, they rewrote the story, then handed me a fork and told me to smile. But that night, someone finally stood up, and everything changed. Want to know what the chef said? I didn't plan the dinner. Judith did. Like most things in the family, it wasn't really a suggestion, it was an instruction. "We're going out for Dad's birthday," she texted. Like I'd forgotten. I hadn't. I never did. But I also never said no. So there I was, sliding into a leather booth at one of Charleston's oldest steakhouses, the same place our father used to swear by. "Real men eat here," he'd chuckle. Judith booked the table, of course. Same corner booth he loved, back when we were still pretending to be a family. I felt the scratch of my thrifted dress against my skin. It wasn't uncomfortable, just obvious. Lorraine, our mother, wore pearls. Charles, Judith's husband, had a Rolex that caught the light every time he lifted his wine. Judith herself was in some new designer piece. I didn't recognize the label, but I knew the type. Expensive, sharp, uninviting. She was already mid-story when I sat down, laughter echoing off the wood-paneled walls. I nodded, smiled, picked up my water glass like it was a shield. I didn't belong here, not by their rules, but I was here anyway. The steaks arrived with a hiss, the cast iron still hot enough to sizzle, medium rare, just like Dad used to order. The smell hit me like a wave. I hadn't eaten all day. Still, I hesitated, knife hovering, and then she said it. Beggars shouldn't eat steak. Just loud enough for the table to hear. Just loud enough for it to land. A beat of silence followed. Charles forced a chuckle, like it was some kind of joke. Lorraine looked down at her napkin, folded it twice. My fingers tightened around the fork. I didn't answer. I couldn't. She laughed. One of those fake laughs, all teeth, no warmth. "Kidding," she added, though we both knew she wasn't. I looked at the meat on my plate. Perfectly seared, juicy. I thought about a high school party I once went to. How a boy watched me eat cake and whispered, "She eats like she's afraid someone will take it away." I left early that night, said my stomach hurt. I stayed seated this time. The waitress came by, eyes darting between us. "More bread?" she asked too cheerily, like her voice might patch the silence. I nodded. We all did. It wasn't just the comment, it was all of it. Years packed into that one moment. Dinners where Judith picked apart my life like it was her hobby. The job I lost during the divorce. The studio apartment she once called quaint in a sad way. The way she described my ex-husband's new wife as upgrading with confidence. She once laughed at my car. Not because it was old, but because I still drove it after the muffler gave out. "Adorably humble," she said about my place, like it was a compliment. I kept my hands in my lap, counted my breaths. Judith was talking about her daughter's dance recital now, how the other moms looked so exhausted. No standards these days. Charles chimed in, chuckling like a sidekick. Lorraine glanced at me, then away. Her fingers brushed mine on the table, briefly. She used to be stronger. Or maybe I was too young to notice she wasn't. A server came by with dessert menus. No one touched them. I reached for my glass again. Then came the shift. The kitchen doors swung open, and the head chef, Andrew, walked out. He wasn't supposed to. Chefs don't leave the kitchen unless something's wrong. But he came straight to our table. He looked at me. Not Judith. Not anyone else. "Ms. Whitmore," he said warmly. "Your table is ready in the private room." Judith blinked. "She doesn't have a table here." Andrew didn't even flinch. "She owns this place now," he replied, voice steady. "We're honored to host her family tonight." No one spoke. Charles coughed once, eyes wide. Lorraine covered her mouth. Judith looked like she'd swallowed glass. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. I stood slowly, set my napkin down. "Excuse me," I said, voice quiet. Lorraine half rose from her chair, like she wanted to follow, but she didn't, and I didn't look back. It wasn't supposed to go like this. I never told them I bought the restaurant. Andrew had been a mentor. When he retired, he didn't want it going corporate. He handed me the keys and said, "You'll know what to do with it." I kept it quiet. Didn't need Judith twisting it into something small. This wasn't revenge. This was reclaiming silence. Not everything needs to be said out loud. Not every win requires a parade. I followed Andrew toward the back, each step grounding me. I didn't feel proud. I felt steady. Like for the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just done letting people like Judith narrate my story. I woke before the sun. The silence in the private suite upstairs wrapped around me like a heavy quilt, too soft to reject, too warm to trust. Downstairs, the restaurant hadn't yet opened. No clinking silverware, no scent of garlic butter, no Judith. Just stillness and wood and morning. I shuffled quietly into the kitchen. The industrial lights buzzed to life, and for a moment I just stood there. My name was on the lease, yet the weight of ownership didn't feel like pride. It felt like responsibility disguised as armor. I brewed coffee the way Mr. Perkins used to. Slow, with that old French press he refused to throw away. One scoop more than necessary. "Bitter keeps you sharp," he'd say. Judith's words still sat in my ears like a splinter. Beggars shouldn't eat steak. They echoed longer than the applause she always chased. I pulled out my journal from my tote. It was worn at the edges, pages softened from years of private battles. I'd started journaling to avoid saying things out loud that I couldn't take back. Last night, I wrote 4 words. I said nothing again. But this time felt different. Not regret, just calculation. Back when I was 25, things weren't poetic. I had 2 jobs, waitressing by day, typing up medical invoices by night. Judith was flying to Greece for her honeymoon, a $100,000 wedding behind her, all paid for by our parents. I remember getting the invite like it was a tax notice, expected, impersonal, no room for refusal. That same year, my lease was pulled from under me. The landlord sold the building. I called Judith 3 times. No answer. Slept on my friend Celia's couch for a month, eating instant noodles and lying to Mom about how fun it was to live downtown. Judith never asked where I was living. Not once. Dad was no help. "Judith has direction," he'd say, patting her shoulder. You'll find yours." That was always the tone. She was his proof. I was his experiment. I remember a Thanksgiving, the one with the fancy guests from Dad's law firm. I made mashed potatoes from scratch. Judith took one bite and said, "Oh, sweetie, you actually tried." Everyone laughed. I didn't eat that night, just drank wine and washed dishes while they watched football. Mom folded napkins tighter whenever Judith got cruel. That was her way of coping. Folding and silence. I stared at the journal, then closed it. This wasn't about steak. It never was. A knock at the back door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. A man held up a small package, then left. The return address was familiar. Perkins Co. Law. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter. The ink faint but deliberate. Mr. Perkins' handwriting. "You'll question whether you belong. Question louder. Some people inherit wealth, others fire. You have both, Wendy. Use them." I sat back in the kitchen chair, the letter resting on my lap like it knew things about me I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't told my family about owning the restaurant because deep down, I knew what they'd say. They'd twist it into luck, into someone else's mercy, into something they could have done better. No, this was mine. I filed the letter into the drawer below the register, not out of shame, but because it didn't need to be shared. Not yet. Just then, the bell above the front door chimed. I'd forgotten. I had an interview scheduled with a local food writer. He walked in, camera hanging from his neck, notepad half folded in his jacket pocket. "Ms. Whitmore?" he asked. "You didn't cancel, so I figured I'd take the risk." I offered him coffee. He declined, already pulling out his pen. He asked why I never made a public announcement. I told him I wasn't ready, which was only partly true. I didn't owe this town a press release. I owed myself peace. "You're a bit of a mystery," he said, scribbling. "That's rare around here." He took a picture of me in front of the kitchen. I gave him the smile I reserved for weddings and awkward reunions. As he left, he said he'd send a draft before it printed. I nodded, wondering whether Judith still subscribed to the Post Courier. If she didn't, someone would send her the article. They always do. The place was quiet again after he left. I walked through the dining room, tracing the table edges with my fingertips. The sunlight came in low, casting long shadows that moved slowly, like time itself had been dragged into mourning. My phone rang. Judith. I let it ring again. Then it stopped. I stared at the screen. Silence. It meant more than shouting ever could. I folded the cloth napkin from last night, the one I left at the edge of the table before walking away. I tucked it into a drawer behind the bar, not ready to throw it out. Not yet. I thought about Mom. Thought about calling her, but not today. I turned off the lights, stood at the door for a moment. Let them wonder, I whispered. The invitation came in a gold-lined envelope, thick paper, fancy lettering, embossed seal from the Charleston Country Club. It sat in the restaurant mailbox like it didn't belong. Judith's name was in bold. Legacy Celebration Dinner. Family only. I flipped it open. My name wasn't there, just +1 to Judith's guest list. Like I was someone's accessory, not someone's sister. I placed it under the salt shaker on the bar, anchoring it down like it might blow away with the wrong kind of wind. But the weight wasn't paper. It was old. My chest tightened. I remembered a reunion from years ago. Everyone lined up for the family photo. 22 people, all smiling under the oak trees at Grandma's house. When the picture was printed and mailed, I wasn't in it. I'd stood on the end. Someone had cropped me out. They said it was a mistake. Some dinners aren't about food. They're about reminding you where you stand, or don't. A little after 4, Miss Doris came in. Same time every week. She always ordered the same thing. Trout almondine, extra lemon, no salt. She was in her 80s, sharp as ever, purse like a brick, voice like sandpaper on linen. You look like someone just stole your recipe box, she said, sliding onto the stool. Just a long day. She looked me over, didn't buy it. My grandson sent me an invitation to his engagement party, she said, pulling a flyer from her handbag, but mailed it to the bakery instead of my home. Had the nerve to write plus grandma under the RSVP. I chuckled. That sounds familiar. Doris sipped her tea, then said it like a whisper aimed straight. The loudest ones at the table often bring the least. She talked about opening her bakery in the 70s. Her own mother told her it was a waste of time. Now they all want cookies for free. Call it love, I call it nerve. Her story didn't fix anything, but it sparked something. A question I hadn't dared to ask myself. Why did I still want to be invited? Why was I still waiting for a chair at their table? The answer wasn't clear, but the asking felt like progress. Later that evening, I stayed after close. Cooked dinner for Marcus and Jenny, 2 staff who'd been with me since day 1. We sat near the window, 3 plates, 1 candle, no pressure. Jenny raised her glass. You built this, Wendy. Don't let them make you shrink. Their words were kind, but I still felt the pull, that unshakable urge to prove something to people who never looked my way, unless they needed a backdrop. After they left, I stayed behind, cleaned up, wiped down the tables, opened my phone. I found the photo of the poem I'd given Judith for Christmas years ago. Custom framed. I'd poured myself into those lines. She barely looked at it, passed it to Mom like a casserole dish. Later, I found it in the trash, under paper towels and red wine corks. That night, I'd smiled. Helped wash dishes, told myself silence was strength. Now I know it just made me invisible. I sent the photo to the printer, decided to frame it again. This time, it wasn't for her. It would hang in my office, where it belonged. Around 10, I was locking up when my phone buzzed. A voicemail, from Judith. I didn't pick up. Didn't expect her to leave one either. But curiosity got me. I hit play. Her voice came through, mid-laugh. She thinks owning a grill makes her Gordon Ramsay. Then another voice, probably Charles, chuckled in the background. Judith went on. Next she'll be opening a drive-thru and calling it Heritage. Click. The message ended. I played it again. Not because it hurt, but because it clarified. Sometimes the masks slip when they think no one's watching. I saved the message. Not for proof, not yet. Just for me. This wasn't sibling rivalry. It wasn't petty. It was bigger than them now. I stood in the restaurant's private dining room, watching Judith's legacy dinner take shape like a glossy magazine spread, gold cutlery, monogrammed place cards. And on every table, framed photos of Judith smiling beside our father, in Italy, in college, in her white coat when she consulted for a charity. Not one photo of Ruby, not one of me. The staff moved like shadows, setting candles, adjusting chairs, careful not to make eye contact. I could hear the murmurs about the credit printed on the custom menus, about how the bracelet Judith planned to give had once been in Ruby's sketchbook display. I walked behind the scenes to the kitchen where the steam and fire felt honest. Told Marcus, the manager, flatly, "Add my name under design and concept at the bottom of the menu. Don't ask, just do it." He nodded, lips tight. He knew. They all knew. I straightened my blouse in the hallway mirror, not out of vanity, just anchoring myself. Tonight wasn't about food. It was about visibility. The room buzzed as guests arrived, cousins, neighbors, old business friends of our father's, local council folks. Judith, in a deep green gown, held court near the fireplace. The energy swirled around her. Dinner hadn't even started, and she was already giving interviews to the guests. Then came the gift segment, her idea. She clinked a fork to a glass. "Before we eat, I thought we'd share tokens of family connection, heritage, and gratitude." Charles stood first, gave her a framed map of their honeymoon hike. Then came Aunt Lorna with a silver locket. Finally, the gift from our family, presented as if it were a group effort. Judith opened the velvet box with a grin. Inside was the bracelet, gold with tiny rubies in the shape of autumn leaves. It was Ruby's design, handmade when she was just starting her craft, a piece we kept together in a small case under a sock drawer, away from the world. Judith held it up. "This belonged to Ruby," she announced. "She gave it to me years ago, before her travels. It's always been special." Lies. Every word. My hands were in my lap, stiff. I wanted to speak. God, I wanted to tear the story apart in front of them, but I didn't. I sat there, jaw locked, chest on fire. The family applauded. A couple of them dabbed tears. Lorraine looked down, fiddling with her napkin. That applause didn't feel like celebration. It felt like erasure, like a shovel scraping out the parts of me that ever mattered. Dinner was called shortly after. Guests picked up their menus and murmured in delight. I glanced at mine. There it was. Lenora's signature steak à la Ruby. I blinked hard, read it again. My recipe, my title, my dish. Judith beamed, already answering questions. The waiter approached. "This next course is a favorite of Ms. Lenora's, crafted in Ruby's kitchen. Steak with rosemary reduction and whipped yams. They crafted in Ruby's kitchen." The kitchen she hadn't stepped foot in since it opened. I stared straight ahead, the edges of my vision blurred. I remembered writing that recipe at 2 a.m. while crying into a dish towel. I named it Ruby's Pride. Quietly, privately. For her. Now it was Judith's show pony. I felt Lorraine shift in her chair. Judith caught my eye and smiled, like she'd just borrowed a sweater and expected thanks for returning it stained. I excused myself calmly, walked down the hallway, called Judith over. She followed, swaying that damn bracelet like a trophy. Under the low hallway lights, I turned to her. "That bracelet," I said evenly, "was mine to give. Ruby gave it to me. That dish you named was mine to create, and you know it." She tilted her head. "Wendy, why are you making a scene?" "I'm not." "You never wanted the spotlight," she said, brushing imaginary lint from her shoulder. "We thought you were more comfortable, supporting." "Background isn't invisibility," I said. She blinked. No retort this time. I walked away first. Back inside, plates clinked, forks tapped, faces turned. Maybe they noticed the tension. Maybe they didn't care. Judith picked up her glass, rang it again. "To sisters," she said, voice syrupy. "Especially the ones who share success, even when they prefer shadows." She looked straight at me. Every pair of eyes followed. I took a drink, held it in my mouth, swallowed slowly. Osric, the chef, looked up from the kitchen door, met my eyes, gave the tiniest nod. Let them toast, let them clap. But I wasn't shrinking anymore. I crossed the restaurant threshold in silence, peeling off my heels like a soldier shedding armor. The dining rooms were dark, the bar lights dimmed. The only sound was my breath, slow, deliberate. A broken wine glass near the hostess stand caught my eye, the shards glinting in the low glow. No one had bothered to pick it up, as though destruction was acceptable when it was mine. I paused, hands braced at my hips. How do you keep feeding people who steal your recipe? The question echoed in my mind, sharper than any insult. The memory of the bracelet, the menu lie, the toast. It flooded in all at once. They boxed me in with their lies, and tonight I felt the walls closing. I slid open a drawer and pulled out Mr. Perkins' letter. The same lines. Some people inherit wealth, others fire. You have both, Wendy. My chest tightened. I traced the signature with a fingertip. It felt like a lifeline, one that I held tighter now, even though sharing it would have made it vulnerable. Years back, I stood outside a courthouse in a dress too thin for winter. I had just been denied a loan for my food truck. Judith drove past in her SUV, waved, and continued on. I watched her disappear. I remember that moment taught me never to expect rescue from anyone who applauds your fall. I sold my grandmother's watch that night to cover gas. That truck was the seed of everything I built, the one thing they never saw. Back in the restaurant, I found a kitchen clipboard, blank space on a sheet. I pinched the paper and wrote in sharp strokes, "You can wear someone else's name, but not their fire. You'll choke on the smoke." No signature, but everyone who knew me would know the handwriting. I tucked it behind the board and walked out, turning off lights behind me, but left the door unlocked, a sign that truth had a path to walk through. Later, at home, I let myself cry, not sobbing, but tears like soft knives sliding out. I removed the apron I used earlier, folded it carefully. It wasn't over, but tonight, that apron could rest. I didn't need to wear it in every moment. Judith's mockery echoed in my head, but instead of anger, I felt a sharp clarity. I pressed my palm to the mirror, looked into tired eyes I barely recognized. If silence was survival, then words would be my resurrection. I heard the phone buzz. Judith, again. I didn't pick up. Some battles don't need an answer, just witness. I opened the drafting app on my phone, typed a post. I am the owner. I am the founder. I am the truth. Then stopped, didn't send. That post waited, heavy in drafts. On lock screen, a new event popped up. Whitmore Sisters, the legacy panel. Tagged by Judith. I stared. They wanted my face in their story, but I would write my own part. I came in before anyone else. The office was still cold from the night, my coffee still too hot to drink. I pulled up the month-end financial reports like I did every quarter, expecting the usual noise, expenses, tips, vendor notes, but one line stopped me. Executive bonus, Ruby Whitmore. The number looked familiar, but it was the bank routing code that twisted something in my gut. The funds hadn't gone to me. They were deposited straight into Lenora's account. Again. I sat back, fingers tightening on the edge of the desk. This wasn't a one-time mistake. I remembered that meeting last year when they'd said, "Let's simplify the books, Wendy. It helps the board." Now I saw what that actually meant. Simplify the books, bury the truth. I picked up my phone and called Alwyn, our old finance manager who'd left quietly. He answered on the second ring, voice cautious. I told him what I found. He didn't deny it, just sighed. I warned them, Wendy. They said it was temporary. But it never is. I ended the call, jaw set. This wasn't bookkeeping. This was theft, dressed in Excel formulas. I walked down the hall to the finance wing, passing closed doors and hushed voices. Marisol was at her desk, typing too fast, like she wanted to appear busy. I closed her office door behind me. "I need you to explain something," I said, placing the printed wire confirmation on her desk. She blinked at the paper. "Wendy, I was told this is how corporate structured it. I didn't decide that." "And Lenora's name on the approval?" "She signed off, It came through her side. I followed the directive. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My tone was enough. Reverse the transaction. Today. And print every record from the last year. Every cent. Every name. She nodded, eyes darting. I could see it. She wasn't malicious, just small. A piece in something much bigger. But I wasn't going to let her hide behind it. As I turned to leave, she said, "I'm sorry." I didn't answer. Not yet. Back in my hallway, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Brixie, the new server, stood hesitantly near the break room. "I heard you made the menu," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "The real one? Everybody knows it. Back of house." It landed heavier than she realized. I nodded. "Thank you." She looked over her shoulder before slipping away again. Quiet, but brave. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. I sat at my desk again and pulled up every document I had. Payroll, statements, board minutes. I laid them out like puzzle pieces. I could have gone public now, let it all explode. But that wasn't the plan. That would just wound the wrong people. I thought of what Maya Angelou said. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. I believed them now. So, I wrote a memo. Clean. Direct. A redacted summary of the discrepancies, with just enough evidence to make them sweat, but not enough to burn the whole house yet. I sent it to the board. Blind copied legal. I didn't sign it. The facts spoke for themselves. Then I blind copied Judith and Lynora, and a press contact I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. I hit send. The screen didn't move for a second, just a blinking cursor, like it knew something had changed. My phone lit up. Finance Dep. Marisol. I didn't answer. They'd have to decide now. Either deny my name or reinforce it. But either way, they'd finally have to say it. Dinner service had just started. The clatter of silverware and clinking glasses filled the air, but it all felt like background noise to me. I sat at the far end of the dining hall, a glass of water untouched in front of me. The tables were full, but the energy was off. People weren't just eating, they were watching. Some guests looked at me sideways, a few with curiosity, others with something closer to unease. I heard snippets. "Did you hear?" I thought it was her name on the place. I didn't need to hear it all. Their eyes were saying more than their mouths ever would. Elian, the waiter, walked past my table. He didn't pause, just gave me a glance, not casual, not polite, knowing. His eyes said, "I see you now." I remembered when he started. He used to ask about the reductions I'd make in the back kitchen. He knew. He always knew. That room had fed generations, but tonight it tasted different. I spotted Osric stepping out from the kitchen, not to check the line, not to bark an order. He walked straight toward me, wiping his hands on his apron, stopping just between me and the guests. In a voice that wasn't loud, but somehow carried across the room, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever enjoyed the steak your hostess has claimed as her signature, know this. Ms. Ruby Whitmore here created that recipe, years before this location even existed." Forks froze midair. Someone gasped. Someone else knocked a wine glass over. Judith, sitting at the head table, didn't even try to hide her fury. Her face flushed as if someone had slapped her in public. Because someone just had. Osric, with a few honest words. I stayed still, not because I wasn't rattled, but because that moment wasn't mine to ruin. I had waited too long for truth to show up on its own legs. Osric looked at me once more and added, "I've got dated drafts, kitchen logs, names." I kept it all. That was the first time in years I felt breath return to my chest without resistance. People didn't look at me like I was a bitter sister anymore. They looked like they'd just been introduced to me for the first time. A few minutes later, a manager came over and asked Judith and me to step into the hallway, to clear the air. That hallway had seen quiet deals, loud breakdowns, and everything in between. Tonight, it felt colder. Judith tried to brush it off. "We always joke like this," she laughed, turning toward the nearby staff, playing for sympathy. "You know how sisters are." I didn't smile. "If you keep redefining my past, you'll lose your future." I said it softly, but even the hallway lights seemed to flicker at the weight of it. Osric lingered down the hall, not close enough to interrupt, but near enough to be a witness. I could hear the sound of someone behind a wall, not daring to step out, but listening. People weren't hiding anymore. They were watching. Back in my suite that night, I didn't pour wine, didn't cry. I sat with a tablet and stared at the response draft I'd written days before. Memo, exhibits, timelines, payroll inconsistencies. I opened my messages and pinged Alwyn. "Can you confirm if the logs match the ledger edits?" He replied within minutes. "Everything you suspect is in the audit trail." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like a wheel finally meeting pavement. I began drafting a press release in my head. I could already hear the headline, "Chef who built the menu speaks out." But I didn't hit send. There's power in being first, but there's more power in being undeniable. "I'm not just claiming what's mine," I whispered. "I'm revealing what's been stolen." That's when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Doug Phelan, one of the board members I hadn't spoken to since the early expansion. "Let's meet at dawn," he wrote. "There's a document you should see." It shifts everything. I read it twice. My chest didn't tighten, but it didn't loosen either. Was it help? Was it bait? I turned off the screen and stared at the black glass, my reflection looking back at me in that quiet glow. "When the mask drops," I said aloud, "you'd better be ready to catch it." The crowd filtered in, dressed in silk and pearls, stepping lightly between centerpieces and silver candelabras. The Whitmore Sisters' Legacy Gala was in full swing. Spotlights lined the hall, and a podium stood at the head of the platform. Judith took the stage first, her tone polished. She spoke about family heritage, the Stevens legacy, how we're woven into Charleston's social fabric. I sat in the mezzanine, watching. The room was hushed, waiters passing appetizers, guests whispering rumors. "Did you hear she owns it now?" The tension was electric. I adjusted my shoulders. This evening demanded precision. The lights dimmed briefly, and Osric stood from the kitchen doorway. He rose to the stage beside Judith. The jumbotron flickered. Suddenly, business documents and title deeds filled the screen. Old contracts, signature pages, tax docs. The audience stiffened. Osric cleared his throat and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. E. Wendy Whitmore is the rightful owner of this establishment." Gasps echoed. Judith stiffened. Cameras flashed. I stood and walked forward, silent but present. I said, quiet but firm, "That's correct. I did own it, quietly, until tonight." A waiter behind me cleared his throat, maybe nervous. He turned and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, your usual table is ready." The room froze. The tone forced attention. Mrs. Whitmore. A murmur ran across tables. A few guests whispered, "So it was Ruby's all along?" Judith opened her mouth to object, but I held my gaze steady. The waiter's eyes flicked to me, then dropped. It wasn't a mistake. It was truth finally slipping free. In that moment, the energy shifted. Guests leaned forward, whispers rose. Business partners approached me at the fringe of the crowd, extending hands and courtesy glances. Judith, her voice shaky, asked me to co-host an expansion announcement. I nodded politely, though I had no intention of sharing that stage. Lorraine, my mother, rose slowly, tears in her eyes, and looked at me in a way I'd never seen before. Recognition, perhaps. The hall no longer felt like their theater. It felt like mine now. Just as applause began to swell, a board member approached me. In a hushed tone, he pressed a heavy envelope into my hand. "This is the true transfer document. They forged signatures using your name." My skin prickled. I held the envelope carefully, not opening it immediately. Looking over my shoulder, I realized people were turning to watch me. I whispered, hearing my own breath. They handed me the key, but the lock was never mine until tonight. 3 weeks had passed since the gala. I sat in my home office, the house quiet except for the steady tick of the mantel clock. Papers covered my desk, old correspondence, financial reports, letters from the board, memos I had written but never sent. I was sifting through the wreckage, not to rebuild, but to decide what deserved to stay. My fingers hovered over Ruby's deed, That faded ink now heavy with everything we never said. I tore it in half. That document no longer defined me. There's a kind of power in knowing everything, but there's peace in choosing not to use it. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was trying to be free. As I poured a second cup of tea, I heard footsteps. Lorraine stood in the doorway. No words, no fuss. She sat across from me like she had something to say but wasn't ready to say it, so we just sat. I slid her a cup. She wore Ruby's bracelet, the one I thought she had pawned years ago. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed a photograph on the table. Ruby holding me as a baby, looking away from the camera, but smiling with her eyes. "She fought hard to make you smile," Lorraine said quietly, even when she couldn't smile herself. I stared at the photo. My throat tightened, but I didn't let the tears fall. Instead, I nodded and said, "Thank you." I knew that was all Lorraine could give. It was enough. That night, after she left, I wrote a letter to Judith. Not one of fury, not even justice, just truth. "Dear Judith, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I do." I folded the letter and placed it in the family safe, not to be sent, just held. Forgiveness isn't always spoken. Sometimes it's a quiet surrender of weight too heavy to carry anymore. I closed the safe, rested the key on Ruby's recipe box. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Some legacies are better stored than displayed. The next day, a small team from the restaurant showed up. They brought an engraved steak knife, initials carved with care. I invited them in. That evening, I hosted a simple dinner. No fanfare, no press, just people who had weathered the storm beside me. We passed plates, refilled glasses, laughed in ways that didn't feel rehearsed. When I raised my glass, I said, "We are not the blood of our family. We are the fire that survives it." They smiled, some teared up. I didn't need applause, just that moment. Later, I stepped out to the balcony alone, Ruby's old wine glass in hand. The fall breeze carried the scent of turning leaves. The street below was empty, peaceful. I leaned on the railing and whispered to the wind, "This is enough." Then I noticed the envelope in the mailbox by the gate. No name, no return address. I walked down, picked it up. The handwriting was unmistakable, Ruby's. "If you're reading this," it said, "then I know you found your way." I closed my eyes and let the wind carry the rest.